matoy chalkeinu, ashreinu, ashreinu, matoy chalkeinu, ashreinu, 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 matoy chalkeinu, ashreinu, ashreinu, matoy chalkeinu, v'yumanoim, umanoim goyro leinu, umayofoy, afoyru shaseinu, umanoim, umanoim goyro leinu, umayofoy, afoyru shaseinu, v'yumanoim, noim, noim goyro leinu, umayofoy, afoyru shaseinu, umanoim, noim, noim goyro leinu, umayofoy, afoyru shaseinu, umanoim, umanoim goyro leinu, umayofoy, afoyru shaseinu, umanoim, umanoim goyro leinu, umayofoy, afoyru shaseinu. Ashreinu, 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 matoy chalkeinu, ashreinu, ashreinu, matoy chalkeinu, ashreinu, 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 matoy chalkeinu, ashreinu, ashreinu, matoy chalkeinu, v'yumanoim, umanoim goyro leinu, umayofoy, afoyru shaseinu, umanoim, umanoim goyro leinu, umayofoy, afoyru shaseinu, v'yumanoim, noim, noim goyro leinu, umayofoy, afoyru shaseinu, umanoim, noim, noim goyro leinu, umayofoy, afoyru shaseinu, umanoim, umanoim goyro leinu, umayofoy, afoyru shaseinu, umanoim, umanoim goyro leinu, umayofoy, afoyru shaseinu. Ashreinu, 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 matoy chalkeinu, ashreinu, ashreinu, matoy chalkeinu, ashreinu, 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 matoy chalkeinu, ashreinu, ashreinu, matoy chalkeinu, v'yumanoim, umanoim goyro leinu, umayofoy, afoyru shaseinu, umanoim, umanoim goyro leinu, umayofoy, afoyru shaseinu, v'yumanoim, noim, noim goyro leinu, umayofoy, afoyru shaseinu, umanoim, noim, noim goyro leinu, umayofoy, afoyru shaseinu, umanoim, umanoim goyro leinu, umayofoy, afoyru shaseinu, umanoim, umanoim goyro leinu, umayofoy, afoyru shaseinu. Ashreinu, 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 matoy chalkeinu, ashreinu, ashreinu, matoy chalkeinu, ashreinu, 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 Matoi Chalkeinu, Ashreinu, Ashreinu, Matoi Chalkeinu, Umano, Umano, Yimigoiro Leinu, Umayo, Foya, Feru, Saseinu, Umano, Umano, Yimigoiro Leinu, Umayo, Foya, Feru, Saseinu, Umano, Yimino, Yimigoiro Leinu, Umayo, Foya, Feru, Saseinu, Umano, Yimino, Yimigoiro Leinu, Umayo, Foya, Feru, Saseinu, Umano, Yimigoiro Leinu, Umayo, Foya, Feru, Saseinu, Umano, Yimigoiro Leinu, Umayo, Foya, Feru, Saseinu. Ashreinu, 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 Matoi Chalkeinu, Ashreinu, Ashreinu, Matoi Chalkeinu, Ashreinu, 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 Matoi Chalkeinu, Ashreinu, Ashreinu, Matoi Chalkeinu, Umano, Umano, Yimigoiro Leinu, Umayo, Foya, Feru, Saseinu, Umano, Umano, Yimigoiro Leinu, Umayo, Foya, Feru, Saseinu, 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 Umano, Yimigoiro Leinu, Umayo, Foya, Feru, Saseinu. Ashreinu, 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 Matoi Chalkeinu, Ashreinu, Ashreinu, Matoi Chalkeinu, Ashreinu, 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 Matoi Chalkeinu, Ashreinu, Ashreinu, Matoi Chalkeinu, Umano, Umano, Yimigoiro Leinu, Umayo, Foya, Feru, Saseinu, Umano, Umano, Yimigoiro Leinu, Umayo, Foya, Feru, Saseinu, 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 Umano, Yimigoiro Leinu, Umayo, Foya, Feru, Saseinu.
Okay, good morning, everybody. You see me and hear me? Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you, everybody, for gracing us. It's a pleasure to have all of you. If you haven't done it yet, please print out the source sheets or download them or just view them on your computer so you could follow along in the text inside. If you go to theyeshiva.net, you'll see the video on top. It says women's class, Lag BaOmer women's class, or something like that. And above the video, you can view the source sheets, or below the video, there's a green icon to download the source sheets. Okay, we're ready to begin. Let me get my source sheets. Sorry for the delay. I was having a problem with uploading the source sheets. Okay. So let's begin. I hope by now you all open the source sheets. Again, it's on the yeshiva.net on the top video. Today's class is gracefully dedicated by our dear friends, Josh and Shandel, with thanks to Hashem for being so good to us in the merit of our children and in the merit of all singles to build beautiful Jewish homes, also dedicated by them for a complete and speedy recovery to Ariella Rachel, Bas Shandel, as well as dedicated in the loving memory of all of the Jewish soldiers slain protecting their people and eternal homeland. Schusam Yagan Aleinu Val Kol Yisrael. And thank you very much, and may you and your loved ones among all of the Jewish people and all good people be blessed. So we open up today with an exceptional medrash. This is a medrash in Shir HaShirim, the first chapter. In the Song of Songs, in the opening chapter, verse 4, Shlomo HaMelech speaks about, he says, the bride says, Moshcheni, draw me in, Acharecha Narutza. We want to run after you. Heviani HaMelech Hadarav, the king has brought me to his chambers. Nagila v'nisma chabach. We will rejoice and celebrate with you and in you. On these words, the Medrash relates an extraordinary, startling story, which is very much connected to the theme of the great holiday this week, Lag BaOmer, the Yartzeit, the 33rd day of the counting of the Omer, the 18th day of Iyar, which is going to be this week, the Yartzeit of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the great Talmudic 2nd century sage, one of the greatest sages, leaders in Jewish history, Rabbi Shimon. His father's name was Yochai, also known as the author of the most foundational Kabbalistic text, the Zohar, the Book of Light, and traditionally passed away on Lag BaOmer, buried in Miron, in the Galil in Israel, and over the years, hundreds of thousands of Jews gathered there on the day of his Yartzeit, dancing, celebrating, feasting, singing, with the famous bonfires lit on Lag BaOmer. Let's see the Medrash. You see, Medrash Rabbah, Shir HaShirim Perek Aleph. I have it here in the original, which is a combination of Hebrew and Aramaic, but below I inserted also an English translation from Safaria. I didn't examine the translation. Sometimes translations can sometimes have an inaccuracy. I'm just telling you because I saw one inaccuracy. But here you have the English for those that it's easier for them. But I'm going to read it in the Hebrew and translate. Dover acher. Another explanation in the words Nagila v'nismech habach. Make it a little bigger. Tamon taninon. We have learned Nasa Adam Isha v'shoima eser shanim v'layolden arashay levatel. If a person married a wife and they were 10 years together and there were no children, he's still obligated to try to have a child. And that's why traditionally, and this wasn't always practiced, but traditionally, the halacha allows, according to some obligates, that after 10 years, they get divorced. Maybe the problem is, maybe the challenge is with him, maybe the challenge is with her. So each of them can perhaps remarry and be blessed with a child. This wasn't always done, this wasn't always practiced. It's a whole long halachic discussion, when yeah, when not. Many great couples that have not had children, even after 10 years, remain married for the remainder of their lives, as many of you probably know. But this is one aspect of Jewish law, that at least he is permitted, or she is permitted, to get a divorce because they would like to build a family. Amr Rabbi said, I want to tell you a story. Maise be'isha achas betzidai. This is a story about a particular woman who lived in the beautiful port city called Tzidon. It's on the coast of Lebanon. Sheshaha so eser shonim im baila v'lo yolda. She was together with her husband for 10 years. They were married for 10 years, and she did not give a birth. Asun Gabi Reb Shimon ben Yechai. They came to one of the great sages of the day, Reb Shimon, the son of Yechai. As I said, he lived in the 2nd century after the Common Era. This is approximately 1 century after the destruction of the second Beis HaMikdash. Bayan lemishtafke dein min dein. They want to let go of each other. They wanted to separate. They want a divorce. There was no family, no children. There could be a new marriage. They want to separate. Amalahai. He said to them, Chayechain, by your life. It's like an expression, I swear, I make a commitment, I demand something by your life, something so important. Just as when you married each other, when you came together, you did it among a grand feast. There was abundant food and abundant beverages. In the same fashion, do not separate from each other, only amidst a grand festive feast with abundant food and abundant beverages. Interesting advice. Come to a rabbi, and this is one of the greatest rabbi of the generation. They want a divorce. Unfortunately, there's no children. Yeah. He wants to remarry. She could remarry. They want a divorce. So what does he say? No problem. You got to throw a party. Throw a party. And he says, why? By your marriage, you threw a party. By your marriage, there was a feast. The divorce has to be like the marriage. So when do you throw a feast by a divorce? It's not a happy day. It's a sad day. Even if a divorce is important, I mean, even if a divorce is a lifesaver, in this case, divorce was certainly tragic. They didn't want to get divorced. They couldn't have children, so they decided to get divorced. Throw a party, a big one. And it has to be just like the wedding. Let's see the story. Let's see how the story continues. Holchu b'drachav. They followed his path. They followed his guidance. V'asu la'atzman yom tov. And they made for themselves a yom tov, a holiday, a great day. V'asu suda gdoila. And they arranged a major feast. And it's interesting. He didn't say make a major feast. He said, you got married with food and drinks, get divorced that way. But the Medrash says, They really went out. They really went all out. They made a Yom Tov, great holiday. The Rebbe said, Reb Shimon Bar Yochai said, and v'asu suda g'doila. They arranged a huge feast. V'shikrasa yoser, v'shikarto yoser midai. You know what that means? She got him inebriated. She gave him drink after drink after drink until he was inebriated far more than he was accustomed to or used to do. Far more than enough. Meaning he was truly, truly in a tipsy, inebriated state, like Purim. When his mind settled somewhat in middle of the feast where he's drinking, Amar La, the husband, turns to the wife and he says, Biti, my daughter, like an expression of affection and love. Sometimes you'd say, my daughter, my son, my beloved one. Apparently, as it will be clear, this was a couple of means. They were very affluent, very wealthy. So he says, look around and look at any good, precious object. Chayfetz toiv, any good, precious object that I have in the home. And I want to gift it to you. Take it, and go back to the home of your father. In other words, I don't just want you to leave the house. Take the most expensive, there's $100 million painting. Take it if you want. The $200,000 piece of jewelry. Take whatever you want. The most expensive chayfetz in the house. Take it. Take it to your home, to your father's home, where she would stay. Ma asasahi. What did she do? Remember how the story began? Rabbi Idi said, Maisa be'isha achas. It's a story about a woman. You should have said it's a story about a couple. He doesn't say story, he says it's a story about a woman. Because obviously, they're both heroes of the story, but she's the ultimate heroine of the story. As you'll see why I'm saying this. Ma'asasei, what did she do? La'acher sheyoshen, he fell asleep, at some point. At night you fall asleep, especially when you had a couple of good drinks. Ramza la'avadel l'shivcheiseha. She had servants, and she had maidservants. That's why I say it was a couple of means. She hints to her servants and her maidservants, v'amra lahem. She motions to them to come over. They come over. V'amra lahem, she says, Su'uhu b'mitah. Carry him on the bed. Ukchu oisei. Fetch him and take him v'lichu lebeis abba. And bring him to the home of my father. That's what they did. They followed, they obeyed her request. And they schlepped him on the cushions, on the bed, the couch, whatever he was on. They probably put him on the bed. It says, Sa'ul b'mita, or he was on a bed. And they carried him to her father's house. B'chatzi halayla, somewhere around midnight or after midnight, Ninar Mishnose. Kivan de Pug Chamre. He sobered up. The wine left him somewhat, and he woke up. And what does he see? He sees that he's in an unfamiliar environment. He's in the Shviga's house. He's in the mother-in-law's house, and the father-in-law's house. Amar Allah. He sees his wife. He says, Biti, my daughter, hey chanani nosum. Where am I? I don't recognize this place. Amrale bebeis Abba. You're in the home of my father. Amar Allah, mali lebeis Avach. He says, I don't understand. What am I doing in your father's house? Especially, we're supposed to get divorced. I'm not anymore in your parents. What am I doing in your father's home? Amrale, she says, you asked to be there. You're the one who wanted to be here, so I took you here. What is she talking about? She says, it's you. You wanted to be here. This is based on your, I should put it a little different. It's based on your instructions. Did you not tell me last night? Find the most cherished item that I have in my home. You told me, your wife, and take it to the home of your father. Ein chayfetz toivli ba'olam yosem emcha. I have nothing more precious in the world than you. So when you told me last night I should take the most precious item in the home and bring it to my father's home, I looked around. There was nothing that triggered, nothing that piqued my interest, nothing that spoke to me, besides you. Good stuff you have in the house, beautiful stuff, but nothing that is as close in terms of preciousness and value to me as you. You said I should take the most chayfetz toiv, the most cherished thing I have in your house, the most cherished thing I saw in your home was you. So I took you. This was your instruction. Was yet? What do they do now? They went back to the same sage, Reb Shimon bar Yochai. V'amad v'yispalel aleihem. He stood up and he began to pray for them. V'nifkedu. And they gave birth to a child. A year later, whatever the timeline was, they built a family together. That's the end of the story. Says the Medrash, Lalamdach, this teaches you. Ma'akadosh Baruch Hu poiked akaris av tzadikim poiked makaris. Just as Hashem remembers those who are barren, and in many situations blesses them despite the predictions of nature, and He gives them a child. Tzadikim, truly righteous, holy people who are aligned with God, have that capacity as well. But there's something we have to learn from this, as the Medrash. If you're talking about two human beings of flesh and blood, two mortal people, one tells the other, the woman tells the husband, the woman tells the man, the wife tells the husband, I have nothing more precious in the world than you. And as a result of that, they were blessed with a child. That expression, that statement is what generated the blessing. Yisrael, Yisrael, the Jewish people who await the salvation of Hashem every day, and they say, Ein lanu chayfetz toiv ba'olam ela ata. And they say, we have nothing more precious in the world but you. We have nothing more precious than you. Al achas kama v'chama. Certainly they will be blessed. If this happens between two mortal couples, and look at the results, certainly this is the effect of such a relationship between the Jewish people and the Rebbeinu Shalom and God. Hay nagila v'nismechabach. This, says the Medrash, is the ultimate meaning, or one of the deeper meanings in those words in the Song of Songs. Nagila, we will celebrate, v'nismecha, we will rejoice, bach, in you, reflected in this couple, what the woman told her husband. And the Medrash continues, maybe there's missing a word, mashal, I'm not sure, I have to look at the source. But this is a metaphor of a matrona. Matrona is a queen, a princess. The king, her husband, and her daughters, and her sons-in-law, her children, and her sons-in-law, her sons, her daughters, her sons-in-law, her daughters-in-law, all left. They went overseas. I don't know, they went on a cruise overseas. She remained alone. Ubo, they come to her one day, Vamrul, and they tell her, Bo Bonayich, your sons have come back. Amra, she says, it's amazing for my daughters-in-law. It's amazing for my daughters-in-law that they're together with my sons. Kivin Shabo Chasaneh, her sons-in-law come. Amrullah, they tell her, Bo Chasanecha, your sons-in-law came. Amra Ma'ich Basli. Okay. Tismachna B'noisai, it's amazing for my daughters that they have my sons-in-law to have. Amrullah, then they told her, Bo HaMelech Bailech, your husband came. Amra, she said, now I could celebrate. Now I could celebrate completely. Chadu alai, celebrate with me, rejoice with me. Of course, she appreciated her daughters, she appreciated her sons, she appreciated her sons-in-law and daughters-in-law. But Nagila v'nis mechabach, I want you. And the Medrash continues on this theme. If you want, you could learn the rest on your own. You could see the Medrash continues another few paragraphs, another few sentences. My question today is, it's a famous question that the commentators ask. What exactly was Reb Shimon ben Yochai trying to do? A couple came. They didn't have children for 10 years. They wanted to get divorced. Obviously a sad situation, that biologically they were not blessed with children. And they wanted to move on with their lives, and perhaps each one of them would try to begin anew with another spouse. Reb Shimon ben Yochai, something went through his mind. He says, Chayechem, I swear to you, or by your life, you have to make a party. And at this party, this whole story happens. They come back to him, and then he starts praying for them. And after he prays for them, we learn in the story, she conceived a child and gave birth to a child. 1 second. So why couldn't Reb Shimon ben Yochai just pray in the beginning? The first time they came to him and they said, we haven't had children in 10 years, Reb Shimon, who's this great tzaddik, could pray to God that he should bless them with a child. And apparently his prayers are very powerful, as we see what happened at the end. So do it in the first time. Why do we need to go through this whole interesting drama with a party, with a divorce, schlepping her to her house, her parents' home? What was the point of this? Now, this is certainly a deep story. There's a lot here in this story. There is a mimer, there's a discourse from the Baal HaTanya on this story. The Baal HaTanya, also known as the Alter Rebbe, his name was Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi. I like to give a little historical background of people. He was born in 1745 in Belarus, it was called White Russia, near the border of Lithuania, a little place called Liozna. He grew up there. His father's name was Reb Baruch. Later, as a young man, he went to the Maggid of Mezrich, who was the successor of the Baal Shem Tov, and he became a very close and dedicated disciple to the Maggid of Mezrich. And when the Maggid of Mezrich passed away in 1772, Reb Shneur Zalman became a Talmud of one of his oldest students, the Maggid's oldest, Reb Mendel of Vitebsk, Reb Nachum Mendel of Vitebsk, Reb Nachum Mendel of Horodok, authored a book Pri Haaretz. And then a few years later, he founded what's known as Chassidus Chabad, the Chabad branch of Chassidus, in his hometown called Liozna. That's why he was also known as the Liozna Maggid. He authored the Shulchan Aruch HaRav, so he's known as the Rav Shulchan Aruch, known as the Baal HaTanya. Known as Chabad, he's known as the Alter Rebbe, the older Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe was one of the greatest giants, not just of his generations, but of many generations. In many ways revolutionized, he was one of the revolutionaries of Jewish history, revolutionized the landscape of Jewish thought, synthesizing the rational and mystical streams of Torah, Nigla and Pnimius, Nigla and Nist, into a unified, comprehensive program for life. He has a whole set of many works. They're called Mamori Admur Hazakin, the discourses, the Maimorim, the teachings of the Alter Rebbe. There's the famous book, the Tanya, there's the Shulchan Aruch HaRav, there are his responses in Halacha, Tshuvas, there's Torah Eira Likud Torah. There's also a set called Mamori Admur Hazakin. One of those books is called Mamori Admur Hazakin, Haktsarim, which means the short ones, the short Maimarim. The Alter Rebbe was known to present long Maimarim, explaining and elaborating the concepts that people should be able to understand them and internalize them and integrate them, which was the hallmark of his system. Chabad is Chachma Bina Das, wisdom, understanding, knowledge. But in the earlier years, he would communicate what's called brief Maimarim. Maimarim Admur Hazakin, brief, concise, very sharp. And there's a Maimer in this book, page Tov Samach, and you have it here in your source sheets. If you go to the second page of your source sheet, you see page Tov Samach, which is 460. There's a short Maimer, relatively short, one page from the Alter Rebbe, explaining the deeper meaning of this medrash. And explaining that it's not just a story about a couple that lived in Sidon, the port city at the coast of Lebanon, in the 3rd century or the 2nd century after the Common Era. It's a timeless story about love, It's a timeless story about marriage, about relationships, and it's a timeless story about spiritual relationships and about our own connection with life and with ourselves and with God and with the world. Interesting, there are 3 versions of this mimer. My hunch would be that different people heard it, 3 different people wrote it down, and therefore maybe more, but we have 3 manuscripts that have been passed along the generations from what the Alter Rebbe said. Now the 3 are very similar, and I put them all in the source sheets. You see, the second page of the source sheets is version number 1, and if you go to the bottom of the page, it says Nusach Sheni, version number 2. And if you go to the next page on the bottom of the page, it says Nusach Shlishi, version number 3, which is, I think, the shortest. And number 1, number 2, I think number 1 is a little longer than number 2, and number 2 is a little longer than number 3, so it seems to me at first glance. Again, they're mostly similar because obviously there's people who heard the same discourse, the same mimer. Whether he said it to couples, whether he said it privately to a few people, whether he said it in the Beis Medrash, that I don't know. They didn't write that down, so I don't know that. But there's 3 versions of it. I'm going to learn with you the first version. Those who want, you're welcome to learn the second version and the third version. And there are some nuanced differences between them, but I chose the first one. Okay, we're going to learn it inside. I can't tell you that I understand this fully. The Medrash is one of those very potent and powerful Medrashim. The story obviously has layers and layers of depth, and you see in this mimer that we're dealing with very profound spiritual and emotional ideas. But we could learn it together and see what we can come up with it. We'll see what we could come up with and how it applies to our lives as well. Zgula lebanim sheyiyah haylada. Something that is conducive, could be helpful for children, for birth. If you didn't open the source sheet, you probably want to follow inside. It'll be nice to do that. So you can go to the yeshiva.net, theyeshiva.net, 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 and you'll see this video should be on the top. If you're watching it later, you can go to recent videos, or you can go to Lag BaOmer, it's going to be there, and you'll open it up, and you'll see on the top of the video and below the video, you could find the source sheets. On top it says View Source Sheets, so you can open it up on your screen, make it larger. And below the video, there's downloads, so you could download later the MP3, MP4, and you can also download the source sheets if you want it on your computer. Okay, so this is the source sheets for this shiur. You got to go to page 2 of the source sheets because the first one was the Medrash, and now we go to the explanation. Says the Alter Rebbe, the Baal HaTanya. Is everything clear in the meantime? The Zoom, anybody wants to ask anything? Okay, we'll take questions later. I see some questions, fine. We'll do the questions later. Zgula lebanim sheyiyah haylada. This mimer fluctuates between the factual story, the physical story, and the spiritual story. Every story in Torah and Medrash is also a metaphor. It's also an allegory for an inner story that happens in people's lives. This is true about every story. Nikra haylada beno bas yira va'ava. There's children, there's biological children, but there's also spiritual children. The famous Gemara says, every tzaddik, every good person gives birth to deeds. We have an impact on people. We have an impact on ourselves. We have an impact on the world around us. Those are the children we create. Those are the spiritual children every person creates. There are those who weren't blessed with biological children. Some of the greatest of the great who were not given that tremendous blessing. God's ways are mysterious. But their impact, their spiritual impact on so many other people and so many other children resonates throughout the generations. So there's physical, biological children, and of course that's, the greatest blessing. But there's also in Avodas Hashem. He says when you're giving birth to a son or a daughter is Yireh v'Ava. The experience of awe and love, these are called children. It says in Tanya in chapter 3, based on Sefer Yetzirah, that the mind is defined as the parents, Tati and Mami. And emotions are called children. And the reason for this is because, and this is very important, although it's not the theme of today's class, but it's important, and I've shared this a few times, and it's really important in life. Every emotion is produced by awareness. There's no emotion that is not born, that doesn't emerge from a certain level of awareness. We don't always tune into that because we're instinctive and impulsive, but that's the truth. So if I'm getting angry at somebody, whatever the emotion is, I'm like, he said this or she said this or they did this and I'm so upset and I'm frustrated, I'm annoyed, whatever the experience I'm feeling, whatever the sensation I'm feeling. But to really be more accurate and more honest, it's not what you said that triggered that emotion. It's the way I processed what you said in my mind that triggered that emotion. In other words, I am accountable for my life. You're not accountable for my life. It's a much deeper way of living. It's reclaiming your soul. It's reclaiming your responses. Now, this doesn't mean it's easy. I have to work on myself. But the first step is awareness. Every emotion has a father and a mother. Just like a child has a father who contributes the seed, the sperm, and a mother who gives the egg, and it's then pollinated, and that combination creates what's called the embryo, which God willing develops into a viable fetus, and then there's birth of a daughter or a son, of a male or a female. Spiritually speaking, he says, this is Yireh v'Ava, the experience of either awe, reverence, or love. This is, he says, the son and the daughter. There's somebody who's trying to serve God, trying to connect to God, but there's no children. What does it mean, no children? There's no feeling, there's no experience. Let's call it experiential Judaism. Any of you are familiar with cerebral Judaism that's not experiential? Anybody grew up memorizing texts? Memorize more text, more text, more text, more facts, more data, more facts. But where's the experience? Does anybody relate to what I'm talking about? Or you all had experiential Judaism growing up? Don't all answer at once. So, I could learn and learn and learn, and I'm a good person, you're a good person, you're trying to do the right thing. But there's no experience, there's no intimacy, there's no emotion. There's no intimacy with God, I'm saying. You have it potentially, so we need an eitzah. We need help. How do I translate ideas into experience? A good takasha? How do I translate ideas into experience? That's the focus of this mimer. So he goes off to the story of Reb Shimon bar Yochai. Now you all know the story, so I'm going to go through the story fast. I don't want to skip, so I'm going to go through the story fast. But let's see how he puts the story. He puts it very briefly. It says in Medrash, we all know where this Medrash is, Shir Hashirim Rabba Perik Aleph. There was a man who came to Reb Shimon bar Yochai because he didn't have children. Reb Shimon bar Yochai says, Bazah Loshne, he tells him these words. Just as your marriage happened with joy, the same is true right now, that the opposite of the marriage, the divorce, should also happen with joy and with a feast. Now it's interesting, now Rebbe puts in the words, he told them these words, and this is where, there's always something called the key words in a mimer, where in other words, he's seeing in these words the secret of the story. Just as your marriage happened in a certain way, your divorce has to happen in a certain way. Now, what is that telling you? What is that telling us? The way I understand it is, what Alter Rebbe is pointing out here, and we'll soon see how that works, is that in many ways, your divorce is going to become a marriage. Your divorce, your separation is going to become a second marriage. And that second marriage is going to change everything in your life. Your problem is you were married once, you were not married twice. Your divorce is going to be your marriage, your second marriage. So of course your divorce has to be like your wedding. It's going to be a new wedding. Now, what does this mean? What in the world does this mean? It seems bizarre, to put it mildly. It seems strange, weird, if you will. So let's see. Va'asa Cain, this is what the guy did. Ubishasa Simcha, during the joy, Amalei tells his wife, take an item that is most precious to you and go to your home in peace. By the way, he says, go to your own home. I guess she had her own home. Maybe her father built her a home. Maybe she had her own home. I told you this was a rich couple. He says, go to your home in peace. Take whatever you want. Whatever you want, take. In other words, I like you. I like you. I want you to have a good life. Ma'asa, so what did she do? Heviya yayin. She brought wine, and she got him very drunk until he fell asleep on his bed. She brought him to her home. She schlepped him to her home. See here, the way he tells the story here, after he says to her, take whatever you want, she gives him a lot to drink, I guess even more than before. He falls asleep. This is what she wanted. She now takes him home. Now, I want you to think about the story for a moment. Why this funny shtick? She could have just come over to him during the party and say, come to my house. She say, he wouldn't listen. We're getting divorced, right? So she gets him drunk, so he falls asleep, and now she schleps him to the house. So he wakes up, he's not in this house. Why'd you do this to me? She says, you told me to do what you said. I should retrieve the most precious item. And I have in the world nothing more precious than you. You are the item that is most precious to me more than everything in the world. Nothing, no close seconds. She doesn't only say everything in the house, everything in the world. There's nothing in the world more precious. What was the result? As a result, as a consequence, as the Medrash says, they came back to Reb Shimon, he prayed for them, they had children. Says the Alter Rebbe, V'hanimshel hu gam kein ba'avodas Hashem. This story is not just a factual event that happened with a couple many, many years ago, close to 2,000 years ago, 2 millennia ago. True. But it's also a nimshel because if it's recorded in the Medrash, Torah doesn't just record stories for the sake of history. We often said, the Zohar says, the Maharal explains this, the Radak, the word Torah indicates what type of genre it is. The word Torah means what? Teachings, lessons. Torah milashon hayra, like a moreh, a teacher. The point of Torah is not just facts and data. The point of Torah is a blueprint for life, a roadmap to navigate the winding pathways of a person's journey through our turbulent planet. So the Balatanya, the Alter Rebbe says the story in the Medrash is not just a beautiful story about a miracle Reb Shimon ben Yochai performed, or whatever you want to call it, his powerful prayers, or an interesting dramatic event. It's much more than that. It's also a mashal, it's a metaphor for life. In other words, it's a lesson. What's the nimshal? What's the point it was trying to bring out? Gam kein ba'avodas Hashem, this is true in our service of God. And he begins. Yisrael, the Jewish people, through their behaviors, their daily behaviors, all the tzedakah that we do. Tzedakah means charity, but of course tzedakah means all the kindness, all the love, all the benevolence that you share, that you give to the people around you, to your children, to your spouse, to your loved ones, to your community, and beyond, like a ripple effect. All the goodness that a person generates in the world. V'ha-mitzvahs. Not just the one mitzvah of tzedakah, which the Gemara says is equivalent to all the mitzvahs, but every mitzvah, every positive, godly deed that a Jew does. B'simcha. And you do it with simcha, you do it with joy. You do it with passion, with gusto, with oomph, with ecstasy, with a sense of inner joy and fulfillment. This triggers within Hashem a gewaldik, an awesome sense of joy and simcha. The Jew doing them, the Jew